Hey guys, and welcome back to the Q&A. So today's question comes from Closet Productions, and it is, what is your wish list for the next expansion? Now, I have actually tried recording this in longer form, pretty much covering the whole question in one video, and honestly, it could probably end up being like 40 minutes, and, well, I can't do that very well at the minute. I'd rather break things down, have really well-formed thoughts on various topics and things like that are within it, and really do it justice, because I think that would be better than doing 40 minutes of a blithering mess, which is probably what it would end up being. Now, anyway, let's get on to it. So today's sort of topic is going to be leveling and questing. Now, first of all, I want this to be the Legion expansion, and I suppose the Burning Legion I think they're a very interesting thing to me. First of all, I love space, I always have, even since I was like a kid. Space was the one thing. Like, when other people would be watching cartoons, I'd be watching Patrick Moore documentaries on space. Basically, I love frickin' space. Also, I think demons are very cool. I think the Burning Legion have got great lore behind them. The whole interaction between them and the Titans is pretty interesting to me. And I think that the more we sort of go on that storyline, that's really progressing WoW's story in terms of an overall arc. Whereas, say Mist of Pandaria, it's its own little self-contained thing, but the Burning Legion have been an overarching theme through the entire Warcraft universe. And usually when Blizzard relies on lore that's been sort of well established in their RTS and even like early WoW days, when they go through that lore, they do a really good job of giving it justice. So I think they would actually do a very good job on a Legion expansion. Now, the other rumours for expansions have been, for the longest time, the Emerald Dream. I don't think this is going to happen because most of the issues with the Emerald Dream were actually solved in the Stormrage book, which is by your man Knack. I forget his first name. Apparently not the best book, but whatever. Yeah, Burning Legion should be good. Now, the other one was The Dark Below, and a lot of people think that this is a scam now because it had disappeared off a few of the trademark offices that were what ignited the original rumour, and this would be N'Zoth, who is one of the old gods. It would involve Neptulon, the Naga, all that kind of thing. And, well, it just doesn't appeal to my interests, and I do think the old gods are really interesting, but the whole water theme, perhaps not for me. And also the South Seas expansion, you would probably expect that to be quite, well, the South Seas, what we know of, it's like Kazan and Undermine. It's a little bit more beachy, like beaches full of palm trees and bananas and shit. And I think you'd have to have a few zones like that, and I'm just not really sure how they would tie that into the Dark Below theme without it actually being mostly either like below water, underground, that kind of thing. The whole Cavernous expansion thing could be quite interesting though, like when you're actually going under the world, but that's already been done with Deepholm. It's interesting, but Queen Ashara is definitely someone who has to be dealt with, and N'Zoth is definitely someone who has to be dealt with, so I guess it will come one time or another. Also, I remember a piece of Blizzard literature, something like that, I don't know exactly what it was, but it did pretty much say that we would deal with the Legion, and then we would deal with N'Zoth. Another thing to remember is that the Legion has been pretty much, Rathian is scared shitless about them, which is why he wanted to destroy the Horde in patch 5.4, so that the entire of Azeroth would be united under the Alliance and therefore would be able to stand against the Legion, which would at least mean that he thinks the Legion's coming pretty soon. So yeah, that's why I think it'll be the Burning Legion expansion, and that's why I want it to be. Now, in the actual expansion itself, things I want, first of all, less hand-holding in questing, and when I say this, what I mean is that a lot of the quests, they haven't really been, I guess, allowing the player to have much agency. You get 2 or 3 quests at a time, they're very linear, they're all set in the same place. It's not like the days where you go into, like, a keep or a town or somewhere, get a bunch of quests, you look at your map, you would be sent to various places on the map, and you'd have a bit of agency, you'd be able to, like, decide where you want to go, what you think's interesting. Maybe you want to go do the Explorer League quest, maybe you want to fight the main enemy in the zone, a bit more variety to the questing. I just think that the way that they've streamlined the quests into this sort of constant linear droll forward, I think the way they've designed the quests like that has really just, I suppose, streamlined out a lot of the heart of the game. And yeah, it's an MMO. You're an adventurer, and you don't feel like an adventurer when you're constantly being told what to do, where to go, in such a hyperlinear fashion. Now, Cataclysm was definitely more linear, but I think Cataclysm, at least initially for questing, had slightly stronger lore than Mist of Pandaria does, and Mist of Pandaria does throw in a lot of silly quests, at least when you're in, say, Hyjal, in the thingy Cataclysm, at least when you're in Hyjal, you do feel like pretty well into the story, and it kind of makes sense it being linear, but there's a lot of places in MoP where it's not as linear, but the lore and the story and the quest just aren't as good, you know? It's like you sitting there kicking carrots into a thing. Not fun. So yeah, now the next thing I want is the more intelligent use of gimmick quests. Now when I say gimmick quests, I mean, you know, where they throw you in a vehicle or they do something like that. And these are cool for every once in a while. I still remember some of the really cool gimmick quests in Wrath of the Lich King. But after that, there was gimmick quest after gimmick quest after gimmick quest, to the point where they weren't special anymore. And a very important thing is, not only did these gimmick quests break up the monotony, but they were also memorable, and when the gimmick quests are constantly being used and used and used and used, they are less and less and less memorable. And it also means that the next gimmick quest you get is less special, it's less cool, because it's just something you're used to. And this double sort of means that any quests in between these gimmick quests are now hyper boring in comparison. I do remember, like, let's just say in Grizzly Hills, there was probably 2 or 3 gimmick quests in the whole zone, but you remembered them, and they were like a nice reward for going through the normal questing. But the thing was that there weren't so many gimmick quests that the normal go kill 10 of this quest felt bad. I just think the gimmick quests are something that have really been overused, especially, well, in pretty much every zone actually. There's just so much random crap that they threw you into, and I don't think it was that compelling. Examples would be the quest where you had to kick all the squashes and things off, like the Kodo in Valley of the Four Winds. I just didn't think that was fun. But the problem was that it was just that, but like with the gimmicks shoehorned into it for no discernible good reason. A gimmick quest should be used in a special lore moment where you really want to elevate what the player's doing to match how epic the story is, instead of just using a gimmick quest to fill in space. That's boring. So yeah, there's that. Now another thing I want is 10 levels of content. Now there's a few different reasons for this. First of all, when you have 10 levels, it means that you can, I suppose, explore a little bit more of the world, because these 5-level expansions, you have been able to hit max level faster than you have in the 10-level expansions. You could hit 85 or you could hit 90 in Cataclysm and Mop way faster than you could in Wrath of the Burning Crusade. 10 levels of content, while I know it is adding a big wad of quests and stuff at max level, I just think it feels like a more balanced sort of thing, I guess. Also, it means that you advance through the levels relatively fast in comparison to just having 5 giant levels, in which you do all these quests and you hardly see your experience bar move. That can be kind of, not soul-destroying, but you know what I mean, sort of. It can be a little bit disencouraging, whereas if you have 10 levels, I think you can be able to space things out and pace leveling in a more, just a better way, I suppose. You know, having it's also a bit easier for players to understand where to go. For an example, if you were to look at the Northrend map, it was pretty clear that you could choose from these 2 zones, then these 2 zones, then these 2 zones, then these 2 zones, and that would probably take you all the way up. And another thing I should probably say is that 10 levels of content means you can have way more zones. Now, the only real, I guess, decisions you had to make in Mop about where you leveled was Four Winds or Karasang. You pretty much had to go through the Jade Forest, you had to do Kunlai. I don't think there was as much option there, whereas in Wrath of the Lich King you could do a whole bunch of different things. You know, you could do either, not the Valence Keep, no, Howling Fjord, Borean Tundra, you could do Ice Crown or Storm Peaks, Grizzly Hills or Dragonblight, kind of depending on how the levels went, but you get what I mean. There was a little bit more, just a little more options, which is great if you're doing alts, because I was able to do Northrend in about 3 or Zuldrak as well. I was able to do Northrend in about 3 or 4 different ways in 3 or 4 different alts, whereas there's only really 1 or 2 ways to do the Mists of Pandaria leveling, and I think that really just grinds people out and makes them bored of alting, which kind of sucks. Another thing though is, like, they did actually have to reduce the amount of XP it took to level in Mop because of this problem. That problem wouldn't have been there in the first place if there was a large enough continent with varied enough stuff to do and quests and varied enough zones and more of them. They wouldn't have just had that problem, because people could go through multiple things that they found interesting, which would have been better. Now, another thing I want in the expansion is leveling zones in which you are the hero. Now, I know that in Mop, they've constantly been, you know, sending you places saying, oh, you are the hero, do this. But the thing is, it more boiled down, the way I felt, into you being the bitch of the main character. You know, you were Lore Worker Cho's bitch, you were Chen Stormstout's bitch, you were Rathian's bitch. You know, they were just like, you, go here, do thing. but the difference, I think, between having a main character that's always telling you to do things is that you feel like your butler, whereas if you have a quest giver's like, oh my god, crap, we just lost 50 of our guys in this fight, and, you know, there's a reward if you go there and help out. That's you being an adventurer taking up a quest instead of this character telling you to do things and do things and do things because they're the one in charge. I think that's definitely a bit of a problem. I suppose you feel a little bit less invested when you're just following someone else's story. I think the most what's the word? The largest example of this was the entire of Cataclysm, where Thrall actually felt like the hero of the expansion, not you, and that was really shitty. Poor Thrall, he really got overwritten, and now he just sort of has to stay in the naughty corner for people that Metzen has destroyed for at least the next expansion or two. Now, another thing I'd like is a more serious tone. I think that they leaned way too heavily on the humour side in Cataclysm and Mop. There's just too many inconsequential random things that a hero wouldn't be doing, such as randomly helping people out with their vegetables in, like, Valley of the Four Winds. I get it, they wanted that to be the heartland, kind of like the heart of the continent, but it didn't translate well to you being a hero at all, did it? And then other problems like having quests called Camel Toe, the random feces quest that they sometimes throw in because that's funny. What? World of Warcraft is a game that's not played by 12-year-olds. You look at its ages, even I look at the age of the people in my audience, they're probably all 10 years older than me. Really, Blizzard, you're going to treat adults and give them all this childish humor? I get the odd bit childish humor is funny, okay, like, I don't have no sense of humor, but I think when you overuse it, it just takes away from the kind of serious tone that lends to great quests that are, like, memorable and really get people invested in the story. So yeah, that's a problem. I think Wrath actually had a pretty good balance between all those different things. Cataclysm was just silly, and as much as Harrison Jones was funny, and I appreciate Indiana Jones, I just don't think... Like, I don't think an entire zone based off him was the right thing to do, because it just made Uldum feel like, oh yeah, that's the Indiana Jones zone, not that's the zone with this really cool Egyptian-based race who are having a war, which is pretty interesting. Actually, they were the quests I enjoyed the most. It's instead, there's a whole bunch of gimmicks with Harrison Jones, and oh look, we have fake German goblins. Like, that was funny the first time, but fourth time through? The same joke 4 times is never funny, I'm just gonna say that, well, very rarely. So there's that. Another thing I'd like is more Dragonblight moments, and what do I mean by a Dragonblight moment? Well, I'm sure you remember Dragonblight. Towards the end, you would do a whole bunch of quests which would involve a whole bunch of really epic story moments against Naxxramas and the Liches there, and then that would culminate in you basically assaulting the Undercity. This was both from either Horde or Alliance perspective, and then of course there was the events of the Wrathgate, which, okay, that happened before Undercity, but you know what I mean. This was one of the defining plot moments of the expansion, and it was definitely one of the most memorable moments. I don't think Cataclysm really had one of those, and I don't think Mists of Pandaria really had one of those. Now, okay, the Jade Serpent, like, Jade statue thing in the Jade Forest, that was pretty cool. On the scale of Dragonblight, no. And I think what's needed to have a Dragonblight moment is to have extremely strong lore, that's one thing, and then to have an overarching story through the zone that is not the only thing in the zone. It has to be a constant thing that's happening. There's other things going on, but this is a constant threat that really comes to a boil near the end. I think that's the best way to do it. And of course, having a nice in-game cinematic always helps, because they're brilliant. So yeah, there's that. And finally, I just like a little bit more scope and scale to the story experience. I think that Wrath did this well, where the Lich King was a strong theme all the way through the expansion and was constantly a danger. Nearly all the time you were either fighting him or his forces, or in smaller instances you were fighting the old gods. And either that or just the effects of Arthas. In Mists of Pandaria it was split between fighting the Horde, running into the Shah, killing Mantid, killing Mogu, and doing random crap in the Valley of the Four Winds. It didn't feel very focused or coherent, I suppose. Bar, of course, when the Shadowpan story got pretty, like, sort of directly followed from zone to zone. But the problem is the Shadowpan story was just so hyperlinear that it got boring as hell, and that's why nobody really enjoys those zones. I also think that in Cataclysm... wow, I just lost my train of thought completely. Well, that kinda sucks. But you know what I mean, essentially. I just think that they've taken away from the main story. Yeah, I got what I meant now. One of the things that I thought was a problem with Cataclysm is that the main villain isn't someone you never really met, and I know that Blizzard thought that perhaps the Lich King was too much of a mustache-twirling villain that popped up and did something dastardly but let you live just to be a dick to you or something. Well, here's the thing, the Lich King doesn't do that a giant amount, not as much as some people said, and he was definitely a step up from Illidan. A lot of people cared about the lore of that expansion, and the killing of the Lich King was a very, very memorable moment that a lot of people still remember fondly to this day, including myself. I think that's a great thing, and, well, they just haven't really recreated that since. But yeah, they should do that. Anyway, that's really it for me now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.